Well, hey everybody, my name is Kent. I'm lead pastor here at Epic, and I'm so glad that you're doing church with us today. This is Will. He's a location pastor over at our Center City location. This is Paul. He's actually one of our teaching pastors on the team as well. And today we wanted to have a conversation about race and all that's going on in our country right now. And I'm excited to be able to do that with these guys and have that conversation with them because we're not just co-workers. We've actually been friends for a really long time. In fact, these guys were part of the team that helped start our church 11 plus years ago. Fun fact, back then, Paul was our worship pastor and he led from the keys. Will was our drummer and I played guitar. So I kind of feel like we're getting the band back together. This is awesome.
The band is back together. I mean, back then, you probably will appreciate this. I don't remember a whole lot because I was just a punk college kid. I was dog tired in the morning. I think things started at like 5 a.m. and I was just dragging my feet to church.
Yeah, I know that because I was the one who was picking you up and literally dragging you out of your dorm room. And what I love about this, being able to do this too, is that Will and I don't go just back to the beginning of the church, but we've known each other since we were both teenagers. So we both have stories.
We're not going to share those stories, but they're there.
So I'm glad to be able to have this conversation with these guys. I know it's going to be really good. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I think I speak for all of us whenever I say we're just absolutely heartbroken about the senseless death of George Floyd. I think we're heartbroken because of the injustice that we see in our country, the injustice that people experience, and we're heartbroken because of all that's going on in our city right now. There's just so much pain and hurt and anger, so much division. It's a really, really hard time. And when I saw the news a couple Tuesdays ago, I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. You know, I had that moment and I immediately posted online. I threw something on social. And one of the things that I said was this. I said, to my brown brothers and sisters, I'm so sorry for the pain. And I'm so sorry that we're still having the same conversation. I mean, it's 2020. Like, this should not be. And so, like, all week, I've struggled to find words. I've struggled to know what to do, to know how to respond. I've struggled to know how to lead. It's just been a really hard time.
Really tough and a really hard time. And I know all week people, over the last couple of weeks, people have been asking me, how you doing, Will? What are you feeling right now? And my first response back to them is, do you want my short answer or do you want the honest answer? Because those are two different things. And over the time, I've just begun to put down my thoughts and my feelings and just write them out so easily I can just send out a text, respond to somebody and be consistent and transparent about where I am. So I just wanted to share that with you guys today. And my response back to people is that I'm angry, I'm emotional, I'm exhausted, and that I'm hopeful but ready. Angry because I can't stand the fact that there are police out there brutally hurting people that look like me. I can't stand that in 2020 racism is still a thing that we're facing right now in the midst of opportunity to have so much hope and joy when it comes to protesting and standing arm in arm with one another. There's people out there looting and rioting and drowning out that message. So that's what I'm angry about. Emotional because there's some people who are not speaking up and remaining silent right now, and that hurts. But also emotional on the other end because there's friends of mine who are speaking up and it's healing in a sense. And then I'm also exhausted because it's just tiring to hear it all the time, to think about it all the time. It keeps me up at night, and that's not what I want. It's there and right in front of me. And then hopeful and ready because I'm ready just to lean into Jesus right now, ready to tell people about Jesus and how he's the hope right now, ready to do whatever I can to speak up and show by my actions and words that we need to have change, and I want to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I know for me, last week I had to preach a message on having peace of mind through all circumstances, and honestly, that's been so tough to do these last couple weeks. And it's like one thing to talk about it, you know, it's a completely other thing to live that out when everything's crazy around you. So yeah, it's just been exhausting, just so tough.
You know, so I think it's been hard for everybody. It's been hard for all of us. And so we wanted to spend some time today just talking about what do we do? Like, how do we respond? I think it's so easy to feel helpless and hopeless in a time like this. In fact, after I posted a couple weeks ago, I hit send on the post, and I just had this moment where I stopped and I was like, that's it? Like, that's all I can do? Like, there's got to be something more. And it was tough, man. So it felt like such a small gesture, in the face of the enormity of the situation, just to send a simple post. And so it was in that moment when I felt helpless that I found myself looking up. And that's always been the case for me. In moments like that, when I feel helpless, I look up because I know where our help comes from. Gang, we need God to help us know how to respond to this, to lead us in what we should do as a response to everything that's going on right now. And so as I thought more about this, a verse that came to mind immediately was from 1 Peter. It says this, above all else, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. And so if you're wondering how we should be responding as followers of Jesus, if you're wondering what we should be doing as a church family right now, here it is, above all else, love. Like, we're called to love. That's our North Star. And in fact, we've talked about this before. One of the most clarifying questions you can ask yourself in a moment when you don't know what to do is this: what does love require of me? And listen, if you ask that question when you don't know what to do, all of a sudden, what was foggy before gets super clear, super fast.
And that's a really important question for all of us to ask. And as we talked about this, as the three of us began to have a conversation, there's a verse in Micah that popped up into our heads that really speaks to exactly what we're talking about right now. It says this in Micah 6:8, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you?" And that part right there, it caught our attention because essentially it's asking the same question. Yeah. What does love require of me? And then as we go on, it gives the answer right there in the text. It says, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Yeah, and here's the context of that verse. So the prophet Micah is talking to people who were acting like everything was great on the outside, but on the inside, their hearts were far from God. And could that not be more perfect to speak into what's going on in our country right now? And so what we love about this verse is that it gives us some clear directives on how to move forward, to act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. And so as we move forward in the coming days and the weeks and the months, these words we're hoping can serve as our guide forward. And we're hoping that these words, so act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with God, stay with you for the rest of your life. Like these should be things you should be wrestling with, hopefully for all of time. And so today we're just gonna walk through each one of these elements and to see how they can help us better live out the question, what does love require of me? And we're gonna start off first, we're gonna flip it and reverse it, and we're gonna go with walk humbly with God, because the perfect starting point for us in days like this is to walk humbly. And so to walk humbly with our God means to surrender ourselves to what God wants for us. And what God wants for us is to honor the image of God in every single person.
That's good.
And if we do that, then to walk humbly with God then leads us to walk humbly with each other. And here's what I think what that looks like specifically in our situation now, that we have to acknowledge that a black or brown person's experience in America is so much different than the experience of so many other people. It's so different.
Very, very, very different. I'll jump in right there because this past week I had the opportunity to put on social media on my pages a post just outlining what it looks like to navigate this world as someone who looks like me. And before I go on, I just want to say thank you to everyone who showed love and sent me a message. I really appreciate that. But one of the things that surprised me the most was how surprised other people were when they read my experiences and didn't think that was a real thing that would happen to somebody. And my thing to them was like, no, that's real. It wasn't hyperbole. It wasn't made up. Like, those are real life experiences for people who are black and brown in our country on a regular basis.
Yeah. About 4 years ago, I had a moment that was just really eye-opening for me. There was another story in the news similar to what we've just experienced. And after that, the next day, I walked into the office and I was making my rounds, just saying hi to everybody. And I walked up to one person in particular, and they just looked like really down. And so I said, "Hey, what's wrong?" And he looked up at me and he said, "The news." And he was black. And I had this moment where I realized, oh my gosh, like, we watched the exact same news, but we had two very different experiences after watching it. Like, what for me was a moment of sadness, that's terrible. And then move on to the next story, For him, it was something so much bigger than that. And I'm embarrassed by that because, man, that story should have wrecked me more than it did. And so that was the moment that next day where I realized, gosh, I'm starting to realize that there's something more wrong here than what I knew. There's something more wrong here than what I realized.
Yeah, I think that's happening for a lot of people right now, that people, some of us are just starting to realize, just having our eyes open to realizing, oh, people walk through this country and experience things differently than I do. So what's just news or updates or information for some of us is very visceral and painful and is experienced completely different for many of others of us. And so as we walk humbly with each other, this means recognizing that we have very different experiences, that things are felt differently, experienced differently, have different implications, and I think there's so much for us to learn from that.
Yeah, I think part of it is realizing that you don't know what you don't know. And so whenever you don't understand something, when you're like, I don't get that, I think the right thing to do is to pause and recognize you don't know what you don't know. And so be willing to listen, be willing to learn, be willing to ask some questions. I think this is where we can start to talk about the whole white privilege thing and have that discussion. Listen, if you don't understand that, if you struggle to understand that, if you're offended whenever you hear someone use that term, man, I think we need to be humble enough to just stop and recognize we don't know what we don't know. And then be willing to ask some questions, to listen, to learn, to engage in the conversation so that we can gain understanding. And let me say this too. Listen, the reason why people say Black Lives Matter is not because all lives don't matter. The reason why people say Black Lives Matter is because for hundreds of years, Black and brown people have been treated differently than others. That's the reason why. They've been made to feel like their life doesn't matter as much as other lives matter. And if that was your experience, then that's what you would think too. Listen, at the end of the day, humility with each other comes down to being willing to set aside our own assumptions, set aside our own perspectives in an effort to gain understanding about someone else's.
Yeah, I think that's so necessary in times like these. I'm thinking of you, Will. How for you, as you think through this, what does it look like for you to walk humbly in times like these?
Yeah, when it comes to walking humbly, one of my favorite verses actually comes to mind. It's found in Psalms 19:14, and it says this: "May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, Lord." And what I love about that verse is that it challenges me in two ways. Number one, it reminds me that I need to be careful and intentional with my words and how I respond and speak to people, because I want to be a bridge builder when it comes to having conversations about race and having those tough talks. So that's number one. Number two, it reminds me to check my heart every step of the way, because I don't want to come off as just an angry person, even though I am angry and it's easy to be bitter right now. I want to speak from a good place. So I want to check with my heart. What are my motives? Why am I sharing this with somebody? So when it comes to humbly walking with my God and humbly walking with other people, that's kind of what I'm working through right now.
Yeah, and I think we all have to do that. We all have to do this work. We have to ask ourselves and work this out. So we actually came up with a question. We're going to give you a question for every single part of Micah 6:8 so that we can wrestle with what this looks like. So here's the first question. What do I need to surrender so that I can walk humbly with God and with others? So in the moment when you're feeling defensive, like, oh, I'm not a racist, though, that's not me. Or maybe you're like, I'm just ready to explode at someone. Pause. And let's ask ourselves, hey, what do I need to surrender so that I can walk humbly with God and with others in this moment right now? And so if we want to see change and we want to see a better world, then that's going to start with humility. And that means by starting with me and looking at me and asking this question.
Now, the second thing that love requires of us is to love mercy. And here's what that means. God wants us to become people who naturally respond to others with grace and goodness. And that's not something that's easy to do, especially right now we're walking through.
Yeah.
You know, it's so easy to be on the receiving end of it when people are giving us grace and giving us goodness and giving us mercy. But when the moment comes that we have to dish it out and give it to other people, especially when we feel like they don't deserve it, oh no, that's when we pump the brakes. We're like, nope, not me, not going to say it.
Yeah,
but,
that's me for sure. Yeah.
But when it comes to this verse, what's very interesting, Micah says in this passage, he used the word love. We're to love mercy, not just put up with it, not like it, not to embrace it half-heartedly. We're to love it, love mercy. And that's the thing that can be challenging.
Yeah, and so, you know, the trick to loving mercy then is to realize how much I've needed mercy in my life from God and from others. So, you know, how I've come to love forgiveness in my life, which, by the way, took a long time. It's been a long road, a long process, is that I realized how much I've needed to be forgiven by God and by others. And so for me to love mercy, to love it, starts with me realizing how much mercy that I have needed, even when I haven't deserved it, and how much mercy I've been shown, even when I haven't deserved it, from God and from other people in my life. And so here's what loving mercy looks like for us, that we show deep kindness and grace and warmth to others, and that we want the best for them. And that allows us to then mourn with those who mourn, and it lets us forgive those who need to be forgiven. And so for the question for us to grapple with is when it comes to loving mercy is this: are my actions extending grace and goodness to others?
That's good.
And in the moment when tensions are high, even when I'm angry, are my actions extending kindness and goodness to others? And this absolutely does not mean that you just become a doormat to injustice and inequality, and it sure doesn't mean that you're going to just turn a blind eye. Yeah. But what it does mean is that we're not going to return darkness for darkness. That when it's dark, we're going to be light. That, you know, Scripture says, don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. God is in the business of restoration. And here's the thing, mercy restores. Mercy restores. And so if we want to overcome evil and we want a better world, we're going to need to love mercy.
Yeah. And the third thing that love requires of us that we see in this passage is to act justly. Like you have to do something. All right, so I think this is where we, like a lot of us, walk right up to this and then we stop.
Right up.
Like we think just thoughts, we might even say just things, but then we stop just short of actually doing something. And we stop for all kinds of reasons. We stop because of the fear of what other people will think. We stop because of what we think it might cost us. We stop because of the fear of the unknown, of walking into something that's uncomfortable. And we stop just short of doing the loving thing because we let something else be more important. Miles McPherson actually wrote a book called The Third Option. Great read. You should totally check it out. And in it, he talks about why this is true. And what he says is this. He says, we all have a set of biases and assumptions about other people based on whether or not they're in our in-group or our out-group. And here's what it means. Like, we all have an in-group and an out-group. Our in-group are people who are like us. Our out-group are people who are not like us. And so our tendency is actually to have a favorable bias toward people that are in our in-group and to have an unfavorable bias against people that are part of our out-group. And so here's how that actually plays out. I'm more comfortable with those who are like me. Isn't that true? I'm more inclined to spend time socially with those who are like me. I'm more patient with those who are like me. I give the benefit of the doubt quicker to those who are like me. I express more grace to those who are like me. I'm more willing to go out of my way for those who are like me. And I have more positive assumptions about those who are like me.
Yeah, that sounds like me.
Yeah, and then the opposite is also true about our out group, right? I'm less comfortable with those who are not like me. I'm less inclined to spend time socially, or I avoid people who aren't like me. I'm less patient. I give the benefit of the doubt less. I express less grace. I'm less willing to go out of my way for. And I have less positive assumptions about those who are not like me. Now listen, that doesn't necessarily make you a racist. Notice I said necessarily. But if that's how you treat people, then it sure does make the people on the other side of that feel like maybe you are, especially if you tie in the history of being marginalized over time. And so to act justly, I think, means for us to be willing to give in-group kind of love to people that are in our out-group. Listen, we are never more like Jesus than whenever we push past our differences to love the people that are on the other side of them. So true. And we've got to be willing to do that despite our fears. And sometimes we let uncertainty of knowing what to do, or even the fear of saying or doing the wrong thing, keep us from doing the loving thing. Listen, whatever you say or do doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it probably won't be. But it's better than saying or doing nothing at all, right? It's true. It's kind of like me saying, to my wife, hey, I didn't know the perfect thing to get you for your birthday, so I got you nothing at all. Like, am I trying to die? You know what I'm saying?
Not a good idea.
Here's why we believe that. It's because we all know that that's a sorry excuse for doing nothing. Listen, whenever you say or do nothing in the face of injustice, regardless of your intention, what's heard on the other side of that silence is, I don't care. And maybe you get a pass on that the first time, maybe you get a pass the second time, but there's a point where it's just not okay anymore to say or do nothing. And I think that's where we are. I think this is that moment. We are there where it's not okay to say or do nothing. Listen, don't let anything stop you from doing the loving thing.
Yeah, you're not going to hear any complaints from me about that. I think that ultimately none of our excuses are a good enough reason to not do the loving thing. And because I think the real answer to that question, what does love require of me, is much.
A lot.
Like, love requires much, and that means that it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be comfortable, and it's going to cost us something. So, Kent, when you think about this, then what's the cost? As you wrestle with this, what does love require of us? What is the cost?
Yeah, I think the cost is being willing to leverage who I am and what I have for the benefit of other people. Whether that be my voice, my influence, whatever it is, I want to leverage that for the benefit of others. In fact, at the end of the day, that's what love is, right?
Yeah.
It's leveraging who I am and what I have for the benefit of someone else. In fact, that's the example that Jesus set for us. He leveraged his godness, he leveraged his goodness, he leveraged his perfectness on our behalf.
Yeah, he didn't hold back.
No, and so we should follow that example, and we should take whatever we have, whether it's our resources or our time or our position or our platform or maybe even our privilege, and then leverage that, use that on behalf of other people. Huge deal. And so here's a couple questions I think that we can wrestle with that'll help us get this right. Here's the first one. Am I pushing past my differences to love the people on the other side of them? Important question. Here's the second one. Am I leveraging who I am and what I have for the benefit of others?
So how can we leverage who we are and what we have? Like, what can we do? And there's actually a bunch of different answers we could give to speak into that. But right now, we just want to give you some basic and practical things that we can all do. And here's one of them. Have a conversation about racism. Like, don't avoid it. Don't shrink back. White people and allies, ask questions. Come from a humble place. Don't be scared to reach out to people, even if you don't have all the right words. Black people watching, be approachable and ready when people do reach out, because we're all in this together and we all have a part to play.
Yeah, and I think then related to that in a way, have the guts to call out people that you have relational equity with when they cross the line. And this is different than debating strangers on the internet. This is about talking to people that you have a relationship with, because that relationship means that you have a different voice, that you have power in that relationship. And this doesn't mean that you're going to change everyone's mind. I don't think that's always possible, but you do have influence. So call it out and do it with grace and do it with mercy, because remember, mercy restores, but you don't have to let things slide. And I think another thing that we can do is to educate ourselves. So educate yourself, read things, read books, listen, have conversations,
And this is important to do with our kids right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right in the middle of all this,
100%, yes.
we need to be having meaningful conversations with our children about what all this means and how you navigate it all.
Yeah, so ultimately, do something to educate yourself.
Watch Black Panther. Watch it. You need to go out and check it out right now.
Yeah, Wakanda forever, obviously.
But for real, like, it is a good movie, but there are so many other things that are really educational out there, like the documentary 13th. Go check it out on Netflix right now. It's great.
Yeah, and just remember simply to vote. Go and vote. We just had the opportunity this past week in Pennsylvania. We'll have it again in November, not just for federal things, but state and local as well. Go vote.
And speak up and get involved. Speak up about racism. Like, let people know it's not okay. It cannot be a thing that's acceptable in any of our circles. Donate. Put your money where your mouth is. And then also go out and put your feet on the ground and protest peacefully. We all have a part to play.
Yeah, and all that to say is that we've got to act. So don't let anything stop you from doing the loving thing.
Yeah. You know, just to land the plane here, Jesus was born into a culture where people were not valued the same. And what he said and what he did brought dignity to every man, woman, and child. And then we see that he gave himself for everyone. And I'm convinced he would have given himself for everyone, for every individual. Jesus destroyed divisiveness. He destroyed hatred. And then he established the church where every person matters and where we can actually find the power to live out our calling to be one. Gang, we have the example of Jesus on this. We have the command of love from Jesus on this. And then as a church, we actually have the power through Jesus. The only thing we don't have is an excuse.
That's good.
Listen, it's the only thing we don't have is an excuse. Walk humbly, love mercy, act justly. What if we did that? How different would the landscape be? How different would the world be that we give to our children? I'm believing that on the other side of this, if we'll walk this stuff out, there'll be real lasting change. You know, I asked the team to lead us in a song that talks about how we're believing God for a move, for him to do a miracle, something that only he can do. And so join me as we look up to where our help comes from.
Mountains are still being moved. Strongholds are still being loosed. God, we believe. Yes, we can see that wonders are still what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. We are here. Set our hearts on you. Come and do what you do, 'cause we need a move. We need a move. Bodies are still being raised. Giants are still being slain. See that wonders are still what you do. Come on, sing. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. Set our hearts on you. Come and do what you do, 'cause we need a move. We need a move. We need a move. Miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is